The wind moved like a whisper across the frozen plain, brushing against stone tools left in the snow and the soot-darkened bones of an extinguished fire. There, under the pale and flickering sky of the Upper Paleolithic, the breath of early humans rose in ghostly plumes, drifting upward like spirits from the past. Shadows clung tight to the edges of a small shelter built from mammoth ribs and hide, its dim interior lit only by the low, orange pulse of embers. Outside, the night belonged to predators and silence. But inside was another kind of hunger, deeper and more haunting. They huddled together near the flames, thin, wounded, eyes hollowed not just by cold, but by something older and more frightening: the decision they had made to survive. When all else had failed, when the land had stopped giving and the animals had vanished into storms, they had turned to each other. What would drive a people to consume their own? And what secrets lie buried in the cracked and butchered bones beneath our feet? Long before the empires and the myths, before names were etched into the walls of caves and stories passed between generations by firelight alone, there was only the land. It was raw, unforgiving, and vast beyond the comprehension of those who walked it. In ancient valleys now lost beneath forest and time, small bands of early humans moved like shadows, following the rhythms of the earth itself. They were not yet the masters of stone or fire, not yet the architects of language or gods. Every breath was borrowed, every step a gamble between hunger and hope. Scarred by the memories of scarcity and scattered across an unyielding continent, these people learned that survival was a war of inches, and that sometimes, in this bleak arithmetic of existence, flesh itself became currency. It was not madness, it was not cruelty, it was ritual, it was need. And in their bones, sharpened, split, and scorched, the echoes of this terrible truth endure. The world they knew was a crucible of extremes. Glacial winds screamed across mountain passes, carving valleys and scattering snow like ash. Herds of reindeer and woolly mammoths roamed vast tundras, their migration the lifeblood of every clan that followed in their wake. But seasons were no longer predictable. Starvation now came not just in winter, but during summers that brought barren soil, or rains that washed away what little could grow. In this age, where the earth itself seemed to rebel, the Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens each carved out territory, building different ways of being human. The Neanderthals were thick-boned and powerful, adapted to the cold with short limbs and the quiet wisdom of endurance. Their shelters were sturdy, their tools precise. They had rituals, and they buried their dead. Homo sapiens, leaner and more restless, moved more often, shaping bone into blades, carrying fire and story with equal reverence. Though separated by subtle anatomy and ancient lineage, their paths crossed, sometimes in peace, sometimes not, and always in the shadow of that unspoken hunger that waited at the edges of desperation. In the borderlands, where frozen steppes met whispering forests, the land kept no allegiance to any one kind of human. Both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens hunted here, drank from the same icy rivers, and left their footprints in the same mud. But when food grew scarce and game no longer came through the valleys, trust buckled under the weight of hunger. It is here, among the shards of shattered skulls and bones bearing unmistakable cut marks, that archaeologists first glimpsed the depth of prehistoric desperation. At sites like Gough's Cave in what is now England and Moula Guercy in the valleys of southern France, excavations unearthed grim signs. Marrow-rich bones split with deliberate force, skulls cleaned with precision, and patterns of butchery indistinguishable from animal remains found nearby. These were not scenes of chaotic slaughter, but of method. A cold, practiced method born not from malice, but necessity. Something had broken the pact of kinship. Perhaps hunger had tested the last boundary left. What remains in the soil tells us of hands that once trembled with hunger, yet wielded stone with focus. These were not acts made in frenzy. The marks carved into long bones and crania trace a story far more complex than brutal survival. Some bones show signs of being deliberately defleshed, then used, perhaps even curated. Skulls, in some cases, were fashioned into bowls, their smoothed rims suggesting a haunting blend of utility and reverence. Why preserve the head of the fallen? Why drink from such a vessel? Was it fear, ritual, or remembrance? In their silence, these fragments whisper of a reality no language can capture, one where necessity burnt away taboo, and where body and spirit followed different paths after death. This was not only a story of eating to endure, but of final gestures toward meaning in a world bleeding emptiness. Even in the act of consumption, something sacred lingered, or was created, in the fragile space between life, hunger, and memory. In the deep gorges of northern Spain, at a place now called El Cidrón, more clues emerge. The remains of at least 12 Neanderthals, all butchered with a precision that mirrored wild game processing. The bones, deliberately cracked for marrow, showed signs of muscle being stripped, tendons carved, tongues removed. There was no sign of a battle, no defensive wounds, no mass grave of enemy tribes. These were kin, family, consumed slowly, methodically. Chemical traces in their teeth suggested malnutrition had stalked them long before death. Fathers, mothers, even children, reduced to resource when the ice closed in and the forest gave nothing back. It was not a single isolated act, but part of a pattern repeating across ancient Europe. From the Dordogne to the Carpathians, in layers of ash and clay, the same story was told over and over, not in words, but in cuts, not in memory, but in marrow. As the ice thickened and the sun became a distant, flickering rumor across the sky, the pressure on the human spirit mounted unbearably. Tribes were forced deeper into caves, deeper into rituals born not from legacy, but from sheer, shivering necessity. Burials grew rare, replaced by dissections guided more by starvation than by sorrow. In the caves of Grandolina, in Atapuerca, Spain, ancestral bones with spiral fractures and percussion marks from hammerstones paint yet another stark image. Children among the dead, their remains butchered alongside those of deer and horse, suggesting no sacred hierarchy, only equal hunger. Anthropologists, sifting through these haunting traces, have found patterns that repeat with unnerving consistency across sites and time. Signs of culinary cannibalism, yes, but also of possible cultural norm. Was it only famine that drove this? Or did a deeper logic take root? One that saw the consumption of kin not merely as survival, but as transformation. In a world where the living could vanish overnight and the cold could take names before they were ever spoken, perhaps eating the dead was a final communion. Not grotesque, but sacred. A way to keep something, someone, from entirely disappearing. High in the Alps, beneath ancient shelters crafted from limestone and bone, archaeologists uncovered a different kind of silence. There, deep within the stratified deposits of cold earth, lay bones that had been boiled. The cavities of femurs told of marrow once extracted with precise tapping, their hollowed cores echoing like ghost flutes in the mind's ear. In these alpine caves, where children wept into the skins of the dead and firelight trembled in wet eyes, cannibalism was no act of horror. It was the last thread holding a people to breath. It did not always mark the end of a tribe, but sometimes its continuation. In stories etched faintly into cracked femurs and polished tibiae, we find strange hope. Children who lived on, spared because another gave their body in death. And so, carved in this stark and ancient ledger of hunger and memory, is the truth our bones never forgot. When faced with the abyss, early humans did not always look away. Sometimes they looked inward, into the flesh, into the fire, and found what they needed to survive, not despite the darkness, but because of it. Yet, even amid such harrowing sacrifice, the boundaries between the sacred and the necessary often blurred. In the twilight spaces of southern France, cave art began to emerge not only as expression, but as invocation. Carvings of haunting humanoid shapes, half animal and half memory, presided over alcoves where bones lay, silent and arranged. Some believe these images were guardians. Others say they were ancestors drawn from flesh into symbol. Human remains found near these paintings show similar signs of deliberate defleshing, but the proximity to the painted walls hints at something deeper than subsistence, a merging of consumption with consecration. Perhaps to consume was not the end of the story, but a beginning, a way to fold the spirit of the lost into the fabric of the clan. In this world shaped by wind and hunger, survival was more than a physical act. It became a tapestry of rites, where every meal bore memory, and every wound echoed through generations, not only in blood, but in belief. And still, the earth turned. Seasons shifted, continents breathed, and over generations, the climate softened. Forests reclaimed the skeletal plains, and rivers broke through walls of ice. The great hunger loosened its grip, but it never vanished. It lived on in the stories etched into skull and stone. The early humans who survived these ages of famine, who crossed frozen seas and watched entire species vanish around them, carried more than tools or fire. They carried memory. Memory of bone and fire, of loss and of sacrifice. In the layered soil of those forgotten caves and wind-scoured shelters, that memory lingers, not as a scream, but as a murmur, low and steady, like the song of the earth itself. They are gone, but they are not lost. Their choices, unspeakable to us now, were simply the language of survival, in an age when life was not lived, but endured. And in every flake of obsidian, in every charred bone buried beneath centuries of dust, their truth still burns. When the world closed in, they did not disappear. They endured, in flesh, in ritual, and in remembrance. As the age of ice began to fracture and thaw, and the thick glaciers groaned under the weight of a world slowly waking, the practices that once tethered tribes to existence began to fade. New rhythms replaced the old ones. Forest migrations instead of tundra trails, fish traps replacing stone javelins. In this warming breath of earth, burial returned. Not everywhere, not at once, but as food grew more abundant and stability settled like mist across the valleys, the need for ritual consumption declined. Yet the echoes remained. The bones told longer stories. Skulls, once shaped into bowls, were placed beside bodies instead of emptied. Fire still burned in the caves, but its glow warmed a different kind of night, one filled with memory rather than immediate fear. Cannibalism, now rare, receded like the ice, but its legacy lingered deep within the marrow of memory. For these early humans, survival had carved more than just marks onto bones. It had etched the blueprint of endurance itself. And though the flesh has long since vanished, the story remains, haunting yet human, buried in the silence beneath our every step. By the time many of the final hunter-gatherer bands began to settle along long rivers and under emerging tree canopies, some of the oldest cannibalistic traditions had already fossilized into myth. The practice, once necessity and ritual both, was spoken of, perhaps, only in murmured dream echoes, as stories passed into generations no longer pressed against the jaws of extinction. New symbols emerged where bones once served as tools and chalices. Carvings in antler, marks in ochre, patterns of family and place danced into walls that no longer wept with hunger. Yet even as these people looked forward into seasons of fruit and water and firelight shared in peace, the memory of what came before pulsed in the marrow of their dreams. They carried with them the ghosts of old choices, the sacred weight of flesh once offered and consumed. And though the earth grew gentle and the forest sang again, still beneath their footsteps, deep in the veins of stone and time, the truth endured silently. In the most brutal darkness, humanity held fast to life, not through cruelty, but through unflinching communion. In hunger, they had remembered one another, and in that remembrance, they endured beyond the ice, beyond the silence, into us. Not all acts of cannibalism in these ancient times were born of starvation. In the sheltering cliffs of Marillac and the shadowed slopes of Le Pladel, excavations reveal chilling evidence of a different motive, one rooted not solely in necessity, but in dominance. Here, Neanderthal remains show marks of ritual defleshing intertwined with signs of dismemberment that suggest a grim spectacle. Limbs were treated with a ceremonial order, tongues and jaws removed, and femurs crushed without urgency. Some archaeologists speculate these acts were part of complex customs, displays of power after intergroup violence, symbolic conquest, or even spiritual absorption of strength. The line between reverence and retribution was never clear in this world of bone and silence. In some corners of the prehistoric mind, perhaps to eat one's enemy was to erase them, or to carry their essence forward. And in a world where identity fizzled into snowdrifts and mortality came dressed in cold wind, maybe this was not brutality, but a way to remember, a way to make death speak before time swallowed its name. The ancient forests of what is now Germany yield further signs of this haunting duality. Sites like the Hohle Fels and Vogelherd caves, exposing layers of habitation mingled with lesions etched in bone. Among the scattered fragments, archaeologists have uncovered bones from both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, showing patterns of processing that suggest shared fates, not only through cohabitation, but perhaps through shared customs of consumption. In these moments of intersection, the lines between species, tradition, and survival dissolve. Was this mutual desperation or interspecies reverence born from coexistence and fear? Possibly both. Evidence of symbolic objects, Carved ivory figurines from the same layers as butchered remains hint at a burgeoning inner world where mythology may have met meat and the spiritual merged with the stark. Here we glimpse a moment in prehistory when early humans stood not only before their hunger, but before a mirror made of memory, animism, and ash. Bone as canvas, flesh as offering, silence as witness. In the flickering firelight of these caves, the question remains: did they consume one another to forget, to survive, or to remember what it meant to still be alive? Far to the east, where caves opened like mouths in the limestone cliffs of the Caucasus, another chapter unfolds. Eerie, yet familiar. Beneath heaps of sediment and glacial runoff, more butchered bones reveal humanity's intimate dance with extinction. Here, too, the telltale signs: tool-scraped ribs, marrow-rich femurs split with practiced blows, jaws separated clean from skulls. But even amidst this evidence of flesh and fire, archaeologists found something else tucked in the dust: ivory beads, ochre dustings, and a carving of a creature with human eyes and the antlers of a stag. Was this a guardian? A god? A warning? Those who once dwelled here stood at the precipice of thought, their survival emerging not only from brutal efficiency, but from an awakening sense of symbol and meaning. In their final winters, they did more than endure. They began to remember deliberately, to mythologize hunger and loss. These carvings were not just art, but testimony, stitched into bone and earth like prayers. And though the high winds long ago buried their whispers, one truth remains suspended in the stillness. They did what the world demanded to live another day, and wrapped those acts, however dark, in the only armor available to them: story. As spiritual consciousness deepened, and stories grew teeth in the minds of early kin, the act of cannibalism became more than a practice. It transformed into legacy. In some hidden caves, ancient bones were found deliberately entombed in carved niches, arranged as if in holy slumber. The flesh once taken, the bones were returned to stone with honor. Smoke-stained ceilings still bear the blackened fingerprints of hands pressed into history. Perhaps a child's, perhaps a mourner's. In the quiet after the feast, when fire turned to brittle coals and the cries of survival faded into sleep, there must have stirred a memory, not of horror, but of gratitude. To give the self, to feed the clan, was to grant continuation. Even now, the whisper of those choices echoes in the weave of human inheritance, not as a call to repetition, but as a testament to what it once took to stay alive. When the cold was endless and death was always near, love and hunger were not separate paths. They wound together, like twin footprints in the snow. And though the snow is long melted, beneath it lies the truth, that in the bleakest hollows of time, humanity was not lost to darkness, but shaped by what it chose to carry forward: bone, memory, and the fire that refused to die. And still, we are drawn to the fire, not to warm our bodies, but to remember. In the slow drift of ash that once settled on skin and stone, in the quiet bones folded into the soil like petitions, echoes remain, not of cruelty, but of a people stripped bare by the cold weight of time, and who offered what they had so that another might see the next dawn. This was not gore, It was grace carved into necessity. Long before we painted gods or built language to hold grief, there was the act, unspoken and unspeakable, that carried us forward. The last breath given, the last warmth shared. And as we walk now in comfort across lands once scoured clean by ice and emptiness, may we remember, the fire that lives in us began in those ancient nights, when love and survival were carved from the same bone. Their shadows faded with the ice, but their story endures in every breath that followed. In the salt caves of Eastern Europe, where mineral-rich walls shimmered faintly in torchlight, a discovery emerged that deepened the mystery. A collection of bones, purposefully stacked in patterns suggestive of maps or messages. Some long bones were aligned in starbursts, others in concentric rings, their bleached surfaces marked with ash fingerprints and ochre smears. These arrangements were not haphazard. They bore the weight of intention. Some anthropologists believe these designs were mnemonic. Others think they marked territories or honored the lineage of those consumed. Whatever their purpose, they hint at an evolved understanding, not only of death, but of memory's physical form. It was here, in the hush between the mineral silence and the flicker of human flame, that early humans may have first tried to show time that they remembered. By turning the bones of the consumed into symbols, by raising memory into placement and shape, they drew maps not of land, but of sacrifice. And in doing so, they taught the cold earth to hold more than bodies, to cradle what it meant to be human, long after the breath was gone. In the far corners of the world, once cloaked in eternal dusk and frost, final remnants whisper through ruin and root. At sites high above river valleys, where smoke once danced against stalactite ceilings, archaeologists uncovered the smallest of clues. Bone beads, stained black with blood soot, tiny finger bones strung as necklaces, and jawbones hung carefully from walls of limestone like relics. These were not only remnants of meals, but relics of reverence, offerings left behind as if to remind the world that the taken were not erased, but integrated, woven into the breath and skin of those who remained. In these hallowed hollows, early humans began to inscribe silence with structure, beginning the long human practice of transforming raw pain into ritual and memory into monument. Here, in the blood-warmed stillness of the deepest past, cannibalism ceased to be an act of mere survival. It became a language of resilience, a mournful grammar carved into the enduring architecture of bone. And though the ice has walked away, and the fire no longer smokes beneath rock, the story endures, unflinching and solemn, that in the crucible before civilization, shaped not by comfort but by the cold, we held on to each other, not just in life, but even after, in hunger, in heat, and in the fragile hope of remembering. Wander now into the shadowed ravines of the Caucasian highlands, where frost forgets the sun and time deepens like sediment. Here, beneath a canopy of roots and limestone, thousands of years etched themselves into the bone halls of humanity. In one cavern, a full circle of skulls was discovered, jawless and upturned, as if listening for echoes that never came. Their alignment matched the arch of the cave's dome, eyes turned to the dark like stars pulled inward. These were not trophies. They were memorials, placed with thought, their cheeks still marked by cut lines, their brows painted faintly in red ochre. Some believe they marked the turning of seasons, others that these skulls bore memories of ancestors returned through feast. In either case, Their presence was not an end, but a ritual thread woven into the breath of clan identity. Among these hollow sentinels stood carved stones, bearing spirals and animal forms, abstract messages shaped in a time before speech had rhythm. The cave itself became a womb of return, of body to earth, of spirit to fire, of memory to myth. And though no voices remain in its narrow silence, the message is carved into the bones that line its floor like script. The past did not disappear. It was kept, treasured in marrow and ash, so the future could exist at all. In these dim sanctuaries of stone and sorrow, early humans left not only their dead, but the blueprint of how to carry their memory forward. The hearth, the shared meal, the bone reliquaries, all became part of the same unspoken contract. That existence, so fragile and fleeting, would not vanish without witness. To consume was not merely to take, but to hold, to remember, to mark presence, even against the blankness of extinction. These scattered bones, these painted walls and fire-blackened altars, do not speak of savagery, but of the relentless drive to mean something in the void. The world around them was cold, vast, and merciless, but within the echo of soot and marrow, they dared carve permanence. And so, their story survives, not as horror nor as triumph, but as the oldest human truth, that in the face of hunger, fear, and time, they chose to stay, to endure, to hold on to one another, even in the act of letting go. In the vast limestone cliffs overlooking what is now the Danube Basin, a final tableau waits, layered under millennia of dust and collapsed earth. Within the darkness of a hollow chamber, an arrangement of bones was discovered. Partial skeletons kneeling in semicircles, their hands fused in calcium and time, as if still grasping one another. A charred fire pit lay at their center, ringed with fragments of burnt bone and primitive tools dulled by age. The scene was not abrupt nor catastrophic. It suggested a quiet, intentional end. Scholars have debated its meaning: a final ritual before famine claimed them, or a chosen act, a sacred pact when all other futures had failed. Here, the last embers of a clan may have flickered beneath stone, wrapped in smoke and shared breath. No writing tells their tale, no names survive. But in the still geometry of their departure, we glimpse the enduring thread woven through the shadows of prehistory. Even when life yielded to silence, they faced it together. Not as beasts surrendering to hunger, but as humans reaching for meaning in the dark. Among these shadows of final communion, there is no boast, no victory, only the quiet courage of endurance carved into dust. The semicircles of clasped hands, the fire pit whose last flicker kissed bone and soot alike, speak not of defeat, but of acceptance. In the absence of words, these arrangements become language, testaments from a time when survival was sacred, and every death was a chapter in the unbroken saga of becoming human. They did not curse the ice or the dark. They met it, eyes open, hands joined, spirits steeped in the fire that once danced above their final breath. And when that fire faded to cold ash, it was not oblivion they left behind, but a kindling spark carried through generations by blood, by story, by bone. We live today upon the earth they shaped with their silence. Their names are unknown, their faces long gone, yet still they remain. Not in stone, nor in scripture, but in the marrow of our being, carried forward in the firelight of remembrance. This is where the darkness ends. This is where the light begins. Beneath layers of ancient snow and sediment in the windswept barrens of modern-day Serbia, a final whisper from the Ice Age lingers. A child's femur, delicately etched with crosshatches, and found nestled beneath a hearth long gone cold. Around it, remnants of a shared meal, both animal and human, lie intermingled, traces of ritual burned into their oxidized surfaces. Here, at the edge of what might have been the known world to those who lived it, the circle closes. This last artifact is neither dramatic nor grand, but deeply human, a quiet remembering, carved in bone, not for those who would come later, but for those who had already gone. It marks no triumph, no lament, only endurance, the everyday miracle of another breath in an age when every dawn came at great cost. And in that silence, unbroken for thousands of winters, we find not monsters nor martyrs, but kin, fragile, flawed, fearless in their will to save one another in whatever way the earth allowed. Their legacy is not bone, not fire, not fear. It is the unbroken promise pressed into the oldest earth that life would go on, no matter what it took. So let these names remain unwritten, left instead in soot and stone, in silent vigil beneath the ancient sky. Let their memory speak through the wind that still moves along the same valleys and touches the same hills. For though time has buried their stories beneath centuries of forgetting, the bones they left behind sing louder than any voice. They tell us not only how they died, but how they chose to live, bound to each other in firelight and frost, carrying sorrow and love in equal measure. In every hearth we now light, in every shared story around flame, their echo endures, not in the hunger nor in the fear, but in the flame itself, in the small, defiant warmth they sparked against the dark. They did not vanish. They became the breath of all who followed, folded into memory, into myth, into us. And so the world moved forward, breath by breath, memory by memory, shaped not only by the living, but by the choices made in dying. What began as a desperate act beneath ice-hung skies became a trace of intention, transmuted across generations into myth, ritual, silence. Cannibalism, at its darkest, was never the story. Survival was. And in those ancient people, we see not beasts bent by appetite, but early echoes of everything that would come after: ritual, compassion, communion. Their bones lie quiet now in earth that has healed, their fires long cold, but their will lingers, quiet, vast, unshaken. For in frost and famine, in every final act made to protect even one more breath, they taught us what it truly meant to be human. That within hunger could rise grace, and beneath extinction, endurance. This was their gift, not written in stone, but carried in the bloodline of all who came next. And as long as we remember, as long as flame still warms our hands in dark places, they remain, not vanished, only waiting, beneath our steps, in the marrow of becoming. So let the ice remain on maps, not in memory. Let the bone circles lie undisturbed beneath moss and time, and the echoes of firelight shimmer only in dream. The voices of those who endured with such sacred silence now belong to the land itself, not gone, only returned. Returned to wind-song through trees that once covered the bones of the remembered. Returned to water that runs over rock once blackened by ritual flame. In every creak of winter wood and every hush before snowfall, their truth still stirs. That even in a world broken by hunger, where the boundary between life and death narrowed into breath, they chose to carry one another. They refused disappearance. And now, in our distant watching, we do not uncover monsters. We uncover ancestors, gazing back without judgment, only with the quiet dignity of those who gave everything so that the story would not end. Their bones are gone to dust, their fires crumbled to ash, and yet, still they hold us. Still, they endure. So we walk now across the ground they once bled into, unaware of the stories rising silently beneath our feet. Forests whisper their names through leaves rustling in forgotten rhythms. Rivers carve their legacy into stone with every tide. Their fire no longer burns, yet its warmth still carries. In our instinct to protect, in our longing to belong, in our reverence for the lives that came before. Cannibalism was never their purpose. It was their tether to tomorrow. And in that cold and fearsome struggle, they unwittingly gave us more than survival. They gave us origin. They gave us will. They gave us each other. Let their memory be not one of horror, but of a haunting and holy resilience, of a people who stared into the void and did not retreat, who reached for flame, and in doing so, lit the first light of us all. Their ashes sleep now within the soil, but their story, it walks on, forever, in us. In the stillness that follows such remembrance, one truth rises above all others, that the human journey was never meant to be clean or clear, but carved with cost and illuminated by the trembling flame of choice. The early humans who faced extinction beneath ice and ash were not defined by the act of taking flesh, but by the endless ache to preserve what mattered. In every cracked horn of bone lifted in ceremony, every ochre-marked wall echoing with silent hope, they inscribed the promise that life must outlast even the worst of hungers. And though we sleep now in warmth and wake without remembering their names, our pulse beats with the same rhythm that once guided hands through darkened caves and across frozen plains. We are not separate from them. We are their echo, still walking, still reaching, still carrying forward the weight of what it once meant to belong to the world, by feeding not only on the earth's bounty, but on the love and loss carried in firelight and bone. Let that be the final breath of their tale, not of what they consumed, but of what they left unconsumed. The aching, enduring desire to never be forgotten. So the fire dwindles, ember by ember, as twilight gathers once more across the ancient plains where the first humans dared to survive by any means that time would allow. The bones now rest, dusted by centuries, stories sealed in calcium and silence, their sharp edges softened by time, yet still echoing with the choices that shaped us before language, before gods. There, in the oldest caves and coldest winds, in marrow drawn and meat shared beneath vast, uncaring skies, they left behind the map of what it meant to endure. Not as conquerors, not as monsters, but as people caught between dying and remembering, who chose to take the pain of survival and forge it into story, into spirit, into the unseen architecture of what we now call humanity. Let them rest, unnamed but not unknown, their memory braided into every fire kindled against night. For in their hunger, we found the first flicker of soul, and in their silence, we still hear it. The first human whisper, rising from bone to sky, saying not, "I live," but "We endure." And in that final flicker, before the darkness took hold and the breath of prehistory faded into soil, the early humans gave us their truest legacy. Not fossil, nor fire, but the fierce and fragile bond that surpassed flesh. They stood together in a world that offered no safety, threading meaning through marrow, communion through blood, and love through sacrifice. Theirs was not a tale of barbarity, but of sublime will, chiseled in silence and carried through time like ash caught in breath. Let the wind hold what names we cannot. Let the bones lie where they were placed with care and sorrow. For every act, however strange to our modern hearts, held one purpose: to make sure someone remained to walk forward. And we did. Because of them. Because they stayed. Because they refused to let even hunger erase the holiness of holding on. Let the fire go out now, not in loss, but in tribute. Their story is done, and still, it burns within us. High upon a ridge, where the mountains spill into mist and memory, a final cave opens its yawning mouth to the cold sky. It shelters nothing now but time, and yet, within its echo lives the last chapter of this long forgetting. There, carved faintly into the stone, are the weathered remnants of a symbol. A spiral surrounded by red ochre handprints, smaller than any adult's. Nearby, lone bones rest, untouched by fire, unbroken by famine. Perhaps here, cannibalism finally ceased, not by decree, but by a shift so quiet it left no scar. The tribe that once lived within these darkened halls may not have vanished, but transformed, carrying with them the stories of what had come before, not in hunger, but in reverence. This was the end, not in darkness, but in dusklight, a gentler passage into new memory. In this spiral, in this silence, we find that even the most haunting tales reach their conclusion not with terror, but with peace. The bones laid down, the fire grown cold, and the story finally allowed to rest. Not erased, not denied, but complete. Here, beneath rock and red dust, the echo ceases. Here, the telling ends. And so, the breath of prehistory closes, curling into silence like smoke once did above the bones of the remembered. The fire is ash now, the bones still. The wind hollow with the echo of a humanity that forged meaning from the grave itself. What they left behind was not horror, nor even warning, but wonder, shaped in act and memory alike. In the oldest light, before dawn found its rhythm, they whispered through ritual and need. live. Not alone, not lightly, but with gravity and grace. That whisper moves still, through dust, through blood, through the steady heat of our own fragile fire. As we leave their world behind, the caves close gently like old mouths content with telling. And in their breathless dark, a single truth remains. Not that they were broken by the void, but that they dared to fill it, hand in hand, heart against hunger, until the dawn finally came. At the threshold of that dawn, with ice retreating into memory and forests beginning to hum with new life, the last echoes of cannibal songs faded into root and river. Yet they remained, not in flesh, but in the stillness that descended after, held in the rhythm of stories murmured around reborn fire pits, in the silent reverence of bones that none dared break again. These early humans, who once looked into the hollow of extinction and whispered, "Together," delivered us not only our lineage, but our essence. They stitched survival with sorrow, and from it wove resilience, unuttered but undeniable. What begins in desperation ends in definition. Here, at the tapering edge of prehistory, we do not look back to judge, but to understand that out of hunger came remembrance, out of darkness, light. The last flame guttered not into loss, but into legacy. And so, our ancient kin stepped back into shadow. Their story returned to earth, not ended, only told. Peace settles where fire once raged, and we move forward, bearing the soft, eternal imprint of those who once endured, so that we could begin. Far below the crusted leaves and frost-bitten moss, where fossilized breath lingers in cracks of limestone, and forgotten embers cling to collapsed hearths, lies the final silence of those who shaped our becoming. Their choices, unreachable now except by shard and shadow, echo not through monuments, but through our marrow. We cannot know their names, yet we carry their decisions beneath our skin. The slow, sorrowful grace of survival, carved in rites we no longer perform, but still remember in instinct, in dreams, in griefs we do not fully understand. They faced the world's ending more times than we have lived through beginnings, and still, they stayed. Their story does not demand horror, only awe. In every cracked knuckle, every shared meal, every trembling fire that banished the dark for one more night, they passed down the only inheritance that mattered, a will that refused to fall silent. And now, that silence receives them, not as loss, but as legend. Not as sacrifice, but as the first breath of everything this world would ever carry forward. Let them rest. The remembering is complete. And now, as the spiral of story draws its final loop, and the ancient sky, pale with memory, leans once more across the sleeping ridges, we walk away from their caves, their flames, their bones. But we do not leave them behind. They walk with us, in the marrow of our generations, in the trembling spaces between need and love, in the fires we still light when the night feels too long. Their hunger became our inheritance, their remembrance our mythology, their silence our shared breath. The Ice Age has passed, but its echo lingers, not in frost, but in the warmth we still seek from one another. And somewhere, deep beneath the rhythms of time and soil, the earth still cradles their truth. Not grotesque, not forgotten, just human. May they rest now, in stillness unburdened, in peace earned by the fiercest path. Their flames have gone out, but their light, their enduring, sacrificial light, is ours forever. So let the earth close gently. Let the wind sing softly through the places they once stood, and let their last whisper rise to meet the wind. We were here. We endured. So you could begin. And thus, the ancient story returns to silence, like smoke receding into the sky it once marked. From the first hunger to the final memory, the tale of early cannibals is not one of monsters nor myths, but mirrors, reflecting all that we are and were meant to remember. In the fragile framework of bone, in the ochre glyphs scrawled by trembling hands, in the sacrificial fire that lit the very first rituals of remembrance, we glimpse not darkness, but depth. A depth carved not by cruelty, but by care. For kin, for continuity, for the fire we still guard. They are not gone. They are the spark in every story told against night, the warmth in every shared breath, the echo of every survival shaped not by certainty, but by soul. So let the darkness fall now, not as ending, but as embrace. For from them, we did not inherit horror. We inherited the art of enduring. Sacred, sorrowful, human. And in that flame, flickering soft into the hush of time, we carry them forward, still. And if, someday, far from now, future beings stumble upon the traces we leave behind, not symbols of survival etched in femur or charcoal halos on stone walls, but ruins of cities, fragments of language, and the fossilized circuitry of our era. Let them wonder as we have wondered. Let them ask what it meant to be human when the world burned or froze or stood still. Let them see not only how we shaped our time, but how we, like those who came before, chose to carry each other through the cold. For the cycle does not end. It curls inward and begins again, always in firelight, always in memory. The early humans are gone, but their courage walks beside us. In every hardship, in every fragile dawn, in every breath we choose to keep going. They are there. And in knowing that, we touch the endless thread they wove. Bone to fire, fire to soul, soul to story. And that story is us. So now the embers sleep, and the last echoes return to dust. What began in shivering wilderness and sharpened stone ends here, not in fear, but in reverent quiet. The story of early humans, of survival shaped by hunger and bound by bone, speaks still beneath our feet and within our breath. Not because of the flesh they took, but because of the memory they refused to let die. They held each other through the void, passed down fire when all else failed, and whispered one enduring truth into the cold, that we are never alone, not in death, not in darkness, not in the silence that follows. Theirs is not a history to flinch from, but to bow to, a sacred reckoning of what it once meant to simply endure. And beneath stars that have watched us from the beginning, their memory steadies our step and strengthens our fire. For they are in us, always, not as shadows, but as origin. And in that knowing, We carry them not as past, but as pulse. The story is told. The fire is out, but the warmth remains. And so, while the Ice Age sleeps beneath soil and snow, and the voices of its people linger only as wind across forgotten hollows, one truth breathes louder than any storm. They endured not for glory, but for each other. In the coldest centuries this world has ever known, where breath froze mid-sigh and hunger hollowed even love, early humans did not vanish. They forged memory from marrow, pulled warmth from ash, and spun meaning from acts once too unspeakable to name. Their cannibalism was not the end of humanity. It was humanity, stripped bare, holding fast to itself when the night closed in. These were the architects of empathy, the first to cradle life not just in birth, but in sacrifice. Let that knowing settle now, like dust over stone, gently, completely. Let the silence reclaim their resting places, but not their story. For in every beat of our hearts, every flicker of warmth shared against the dark, they live on. Not in what they took, but in what they gave. Life, continuity, us. And as the final breath of their story dissolves into the silence of the ancient winds, there is nothing left but gratitude, not for the pain they endured, but for the path they carved. A line of fire drawn through stone and hunger, through sacrifice and silence, through everything lost and everything held too tightly to be forgotten. These early humans, whose bones slumber beneath forests reborn and rivers remade, are not ghosts. They are foundation. Though their shelters have collapsed and their names slipped into wind, the pulse they passed down beats in the marrow of every gesture we make toward care, every fire we light to keep another warm. In their darkest hours, they became the light by which we still find our way. Let the cave close now behind us, the ashes drift back into soil. Let the world carry forward their final gift, the truth that love, even when clad in hunger and fear, does not vanish. It endures, as they did, against all odds and across all time. Their story ends here, but their warmth remains, flickering just behind the veil of silence, where all true beginnings live. And now, in this last flickering breath of remembrance, let us part from their fire not with fear, but with reverence. For all the ancient acts they performed beneath crushing skies and brittle stars, one meaning glows through the ashes, that no matter the form it took, survival was never selfish. It was a reaching out, a giving in, a sacred trade between existence and memory. The early humans who once knelt around the embers, who once traced life in ochre and marrow, are with us still, not as specters bound to shame, but as the roots from which we rose. Their cannibalism was not horror, but a mirror held steady to the face of time, showing us that to love, to mourn, to endure, even in hunger, is the origin of all humanity. So let this be their benediction, that we, the living, carry forward not the act, but the meaning behind it, that in fire, in shadow, in silence, we remember not what they became, but what they made possible. The night is quiet now, the bones at rest. And still, the warmth remains. So let this final warmth gather in the hollow of memory, where the last coals breathe slow upon soil once touched by hands that knew sorrow deeper than speech. Their story is not extinguished, only quiet now, resting in the bone-deep knowing that through hunger, fear, and immeasurable cold, they cradled what mattered, the fragile thread of tomorrow. We light no new fires here, make no new prayers. We simply stand at the edge of their echo and listen. Listen to the silence where their voices once burned, and feel, in that hush, the heartbeat they left in us. The tale of early humans who turned to one another in their darkest hour ends not in pain, but in reverence. It asks nothing, promises nothing, except this, that even when the world breaks, we may still bind it again in care. That is the legacy sealed into dust, etched into marrow, and passed forward in the shape of every life yet lived. They are gone, but the warmth, the sacred, enduring warmth, remains. And so here, in the final hush of their chronicle, we close the circle not with sorrow, but with solemn acknowledgement. The story of early cannibalism, of kin consumed not in cruelty but in covenant, offers no easy comfort, only the raw, unflinching light of what it meant to stay alive when the sky refused warmth and the earth gave no promise. It was never about death. It was about defiance. In their direst moments, they chose each other, again and again, crafting a legacy not in stone, but in sacrifice, not in glory, but in grit. Their bones lie hidden now, along cave walls and beneath rivers that forgot their names. Yet what they carried forward arrived with us, threaded in spirit, through every breath we take when all else seems lost. In the echo of their fires, we remember. Endurance was not their burden, but their gift. And though their mouths have long gone still, their final song lingers, tender, terrible, and true. A song not of ending, but of beginning. The first hymn of what it means to be human. So let this be the last breath, drawn from embers long cooled yet still glowing in the cave dark of our memory. Let the tale of early humans who endured through the terror of hunger, who shaped survival from firelight and bone, settle at last into reverent silence, not as a myth of savagery, but as a crucible from which our compassion, resilience, and need for one another were first forged. Beneath ice, they chose one another. Beneath fear, they reached for flame. And in doing so, they passed on more than life. They passed on the shape of our soul. The fire that once flickered against the void may be ash now, but its warmth has never left us. It burns in every act of care, in every hand held through darkness, in every story whispered by firelight. They are not lost. Their silence blossoms within us, alive and enduring. This is the final closing, not of night, but of a circle eternal, from cold to communion, to the quiet grace of beginning again. Their story is done, and in us, it begins anew. And as the circle draws shut around these ancient fires, there is only quiet, vast and listening, where once hunger cried and footsteps cracked frozen soil. We do not rekindle their flame, for the warmth they ignited still smoulders within our breath, shaping every bond, every sacrifice, and every tale we pass hand to hand in darkness. Their memory is not buried, it is rooted, bound into the DNA of our endurance, into the tenderness that arises even now when we see another suffer and stretch forth a hand. Through bone and ash, not with shame, but with sacred intent, they preserved the thread of existence, and from that slender thread, we wove everything that followed. So let them rest now beneath the wild grass and sky, not as relics of despair, but as keepers of origin. For in their hardest hour, they lit the first fire of humanity. And that fire, though unseen, still warms us, still teaches us, and still speaks not of what was taken, but of all that was given, so that our story could go on. So let the final silence fall softly, like snow over the scattered bones and blackened stones of deep time. This is no ending of sorrow, but a resting place for remembrance. The point where story becomes soil, where breath becomes memory, and where the cries of the first to endure melt into the earth's slow rhythm. We close the tale not with judgment, but with reverence. The early humans who once knelt in the firelight of frozen caves, who offered flesh in mourning as much as in need, sought not to survive for themselves alone, but for the future that now lives in our lungs. In them, we see not savagery, but bravery, not despair, but defiance laced with love. So may they rest within us, ancient and immortal, their fire now a quiet glow behind the ribs of modern hearts. Because they endured, we began. That is the truth carried in every step across this earth. They did not disappear. They became us. And so the wind lifts one last time through the dead branches that rim the entrance of their forgotten shelter, circling where fire once breathed and bones, long since dust, once bore witness. Here, the story ends not in horror or despair, but in stillness, as the hush of history takes them home. The early humans who once braved hunger sharp enough to carve through kin, who carved memory into marrow and love into loss, are gone. But they did not vanish. They became the breath in our stories, the warmth in our reaching, the quiet strength behind every choice to stay. They taught us, not through word, but through wound, that survival is not the victory of the self, but the embrace of the many, even when the darkness closes in. Let their last fire rest now, buried in ash and soil and time. Not forgotten, not feared, simply finished. And as we step back into light, we carry them not behind, but within. Flame folded into flesh, memory folded into meaning. Their whisper lingers in the silence. We endured, so you could begin. So let us walk now, gently, into the world they made possible. Each footstep a soft echo upon the deep earth where their story sleeps. The fire no longer cracks, the wind no longer howls with hunger's cry, but their legacy murmurs beneath every breath and every bond we form. They endured not to be revered, but so that we might never have to make the same impossible choices again. And though we cannot offer them names or monuments, we offer something deeper still: remembrance. In our quiet compassion, born in the slow heat of their sacrifice, in our instinct to reach for one another against the cold, their memory endures. The ashes have faded, yes, but the warmth remains, flickering in every whisper of hope we carry forward. Their path ends, but our path begins, shaped by bone, shadowed by silence, and lit forever by the first flame they dared to cradle in the dark. And as we take the final steps from the cave mouth into a world shaped by their breath and sorrow, may we carry not only their shadows, but their strength. The ones who fed the future with their silent sacrifice, who bore hunger not as shame, but as burden willingly shared, do not fade in our forgetting. They remain in the structure of our stories, in the gravity of our care, in the mystery we feel when the night grows cold and we draw close to flame. Theirs was never a tale meant to linger in darkness, but to kindle a light within us. A light born not of conquest, but of communion. So let us not speak of them with pity, but with reverence. Let the earth take their bones gently, and let memory, steady and patient, do the rest. What they began in fire and bone, we continue in spirit and soul. Theirs was the first whisper of what it means to be human. And now, as their fire passes wholly into us, we walk on, not alone, but accompanied forever by their light. So now, with the cave long behind us and the fire reduced to memory alone, we arrive at the quiet edge of knowing. The story of early human cannibalism, so often twisted into fear or forgotten entirely, takes its place not as horror, but as a testament to the desperate, defiant beauty of survival. It was never the flesh that mattered. It was the hands held, the memories made sacred, the breath passed forward when all else vanished. Beneath glaciers, through blood and silence, they chose to live, and in doing so, gave us the inheritance of our humanity. No tombstone bears their names, no monument rises where they once knelt, but the earth holds them still, and in every heartbeat that refuses to give up, in every fragile hope passed quietly from one to another in darkness, they live on. Let the wind carry their final words, unspoken, unwritten, yet eternally known. We endured, we became, and now, through you, we still remain. So let the fire sleep now, deep beneath the hollows where the first memories gathered and the oldest decisions were made. Let the silence settle like mist over stones blackened by generations of breath, sorrow, and determination. The story of early humans is not one of judgment, but of witness, to what it took to hold fast to life when even the sky seemed to forget them. Through hunger sharpened by ritual, and through memory etched into the bones of the fallen, they did not just endure the Ice Age, they navigated it with grace carved from necessity. And now, as we return to our world of abundance, where fear seldom bites as closely, may we not turn from their echoes, but honor them. Let us walk softer for the paths they cleared, hold one another closer for the choices they bore. For they left us no cities, no scriptures, no songs, only a fire sewn into the shape of our being, steady and eternal. And in that quiet warmth, they are with us always. Our first ancestors, our hidden light, our beginning. So as the circle closes and silence once more returns to where breath once lingered in chilled air, we step back, carrying forward the weight of what was never meant to be light. The bones lie still beneath ancient loam, names forgotten, but never without name. Voices long quiet, yet still murmuring in the pulse of our own hearts. Early humans did not seek glory, nor did they leave behind stone markers of triumph. Only lines etched into vulnerability, carved through famine and fire, showing us not how to survive, but why. To remember, to hold, to pass forward. As twilight deepens over the last remembered cave, their legacy glows not in cold stone, but in the warmth we offer each other now. The fire is out, yes, but its light is not gone. It lives in us because of them. And with that final echo, gentle and sacred, the tale returns to soil, complete, enduring, and forever awake within the marrow of humanity. And thus, beneath stars that once blinked above their final nights, and across lands still shaped by their passing, the last breath of their story settles into place. It is no longer a tale of bones or hunger, nor one of survival alone. It is a story of origin, of communion, of what it cost to create a future. The early humans who kindled the first fires and dared to endure through the absence of warmth left us no words, but gave us meaning. In blood and silence, they carried the shape of what it meant to be human, and passed it on. Now, the caves are quiet, the bones at rest, and the sky vast and listening. But we, the inheritors of their fire, walk forward with the heat of memory still alive in our chests. We do not close the story in sorrow, but in gratitude. Their gifts were not glory or wealth, but breath, bond, and becoming. Let the light dim now, not in grief, but in peace. For they endured, and through us, their warmth remains. And now, let the sky deepen and the earth grow still. For the final page has turned in the long and silent book of those who came before us. The early humans, weathered by frost, forged in hunger, and bound in a communion few will ever understand, do not ask to be forgiven nor enshrined, only remembered. Their tale, sewn not in ink but in scar and ash, is the first chapter of who we are. Not perfect, but persistent. Not enlightened, but enduring. As the fire dims and the echoes fade into quiet earth, we step into the vastness they carved with their courage. Let us no longer look upon that past in fear, but in reverence. For it is not death that defines our beginning, but the love that chose to stand in its shadow. Let the cave close softly. Let the world keep spinning. And in every flicker of warmth shared between us, their story lives on, enduring, unseen, eternal. The telling is done. The fire sleeps. But the warmth remains. And so, as the last word fades into the hush beyond the flame, their journey becomes ours, not behind us, but beneath us, in every act of grace chosen over despair, in every bond held close when the cold pressed near. The early humans did not survive the Ice Age by strength alone. They survived by remembrance, by sacrifice, by the fragile, fierce decision to carry one another forward through darkness. They gave us more than tools, more than fire. They gave us the knowledge that even in the harshest chapter of existence, kindness could be carved from bone, and love could be kindled with the last breath. Let this be their final echo, cradled gently in the quiet that follows, that we are not just descendants of survival. We are the living proof of relentless hope. The flame has dimmed, the cave is still, but their warmth endures, forever in us. And in this final breath, traced through soot and stone, their presence becomes no longer a story to tell, but a light to follow. The early humans, who carved meaning from marrow and stitched kinship through hunger, have given us more than their bones. They have given us ourselves. Every kindness that endures, every fire lit in human closeness, carries their imprint. They left behind no verses, no names carried on wind, but their truth beats steady in every act of grace that bridges survival and soul. The earth holds them close now, wrapped in centuries of stillness. Yet in our warmth, in our will to endure and to care, they move still, quiet and eternal. Let the silence embrace what is finished. Let the flame lie undisturbed. The journey is done, not ended in ice, but entrusted to us, to memory, to breath. And as the story closes, one promise remains, fierce and gentle all at once. They gave everything, so we might begin. So let the night fall, soft and unbroken, over the lands they once walked, and let the quiet hold what words cannot. Beneath forests they never saw grow, and beneath stars they once watched flicker beyond frost, their legacy lingers, not in the haunting, but in the holding. Every gesture of warmth, every whisper passed in darkness between those who fear the cold, carries their fire forward. Their names are buried in wind and ash, but their lesson burns with matchless clarity. That humanity's greatest act was not invention or conquest, but simply, fiercely, choosing one another again and again. So ends the tale of bone and fire, of silence and survival, not in shadow, but in light long carried, never extinguished. Their warmth remains, and through us, it always will. And thus, with the long fire of their memory spent into ash and breath, we leave the story where they once stood, between silence and flame, between hunger and hope. The tale of early humans who fed each other not in cruelty, but in covenant, ends not with judgment, but with understanding. They faced the end of the world not with vengeance, but with arms still reaching outward, clinging to meaning where none could be promised. In every cracked femur, every soot-streaked wall, they built no monuments, but left behind the architecture of humanity itself. This was not a story of what they became, but of what they preserved at any cost. So let us go now, quietly, bearing what they could not carry alone, the light of endurance, the warmth of memory, and the truth that even in the darkest night this world has ever known, love, fragile, fierce, and firebound, never flickered out. It remains. It is us. And now, as the last ember falls to silence and the frost settles once more across the land of their echoes, the story is complete. What remains is not the memory of horror, but of holding, of a people who, when everything else failed, chose one another in a world that offered nothing. They lit the first fires not just for warmth, but for remembrance. They gave of themselves not in hopelessness, but in a devotion so deep it outlasted the bones themselves. Their cannibalism was never legacy. Their love was. Passed through flame, through famine, through generations unbroken even by silence. And so it ends, not in snow or ash, but in knowing. They dared the night to take them, and instead gave it light. Let that light live on, steady within us, whispering the truth behind every human breath. That we endure not alone, not by strength, but by grace born of the oldest fire. Their fire, our fire, still burning. Let it end then as it began, in fire, in silence, in the breath between survival and story. The early humans, whose bones now slumber beneath millennia of soil and stone, gave us more than fragments of history. They gifted us the shape of our humanity, defined not by dominance, but by endurance. In the darkest corridors of time, they chose not collapse, but communion. What they passed on was neither flesh nor fire, but something buried deeper still, the will to carry one another across the abyss. And so, their tale returns to the earth, whole and unforgotten, folded gently into the marrow of us all. The telling is finished. The warmth remains. The story, our story, lives on. Let these final words settle like ash upon stone, quiet and enduring, as we step away from the ancient flame, not into darkness, but into the gentle dawn it once promised. The early humans, their choices etched into time's deepest grooves, have spoken across epochs not for pity, but for presence. We have walked their story, bone by bone, flame by flame, and now, at the edge of their silence, we inherit not their despair, but their defiance. Let no myth obscure them, no fear reduce them. They were not monsters. They were memory holders, fire bearers, architects of us. And though time has buried their names and soot has swallowed their breath, one truth remains, unburned and glowing. We are here because they were. We begin, always, in their heat. So let this be the last step in sacred silence, offered not as farewell, but as reverence. The tale of early humans, told in marrow and flame, closes without spectacle, only stillness, the kind that follows sacred understanding. Beneath their world of ice and hunger, they wrote no books, built no temples, yet gave us everything. The will to remain, the strength to remember, and the fire to begin again. We leave now the ancient cave, the stone tools, the soot-streaked bones, not forgetting, but carrying forward their light, quiet, enduring, and human. Let the echoes rest. Let the warmth hold. The fire is gone, the story told. And in its final glow, one truth flickers undying. They lived, they loved, they endured. And through that, so do we. And thus we come to rest, not at an ending, but at the still center of a story that never truly left us. A tale carved not in timelines, but in bone and fire. In the bold, desperate whisper that humanity once breathed beneath the crushing sky of the long winter. Early cannibalism was never about what they consumed, but what they chose to preserve: love, memory, lineage, survival. Beneath ash and silence, they birthed the greatest truth time has ever kept, that we are not held together by ease or abundance, but by the sacred resolve to carry each other through the dark. Let that be the final ember glowing in the hollow of history, that before gods, before nations, before even language, there were hands reaching toward one another in the firelight. And in that reaching, our future was born. Their bones are dust, their shelters are gone, but their warmth, patient, powerful, and unbroken, remains. And through it, so do we. So here, at the final quiet beyond the fire's last breath, we close the long circle of the ones who walked before us, not with noise, but with knowing. Their legacy was not forged only in what they endured, but in the tenderness laced through every sacrifice made in silence. In darkness, they gave us light, not by overpowering the night, but by choosing one another when all else failed. That is how the future was born, not from conquest, but from communion. As the wind moves gently across stone and time, we offer no final word, only this promise: that the warmth they kindled in bone and breath shall never be cold again, so long as we remember. Let the fire rest, let the silence keep, and let their story sleep at last in peace, eternal, intact, and alive within us. Let the cave close gently now behind us, its shadows folded with care, its silence soft with reverence. The bones are still, the fire gone to ash, and the telling complete. We do not look back in horror, but in honor, for what they left behind was never meant for awe or fear, but for understanding. That beneath the hunger, beneath the cold, beneath the chosen acts no longer spoken, there was always one purpose: to guard what could not be lost. The future, ours. And now that their story has shaped its final line in the dust, we carry it not as burden, but as blessing. Their warmth has not vanished. It lives still in the marrow of our compassion, in the ember of our courage, in the breath we share with each other. Always forward, always remembering. The fire is out, the story is whole, and the warmth, eternal, walks on in us. So as the story settles at last, low and steady as the breath beneath ancient stone, we walk forward, bearing not the burden of their hunger, but the radiance of their endurance. Early humans, whose lives flickered between extinction and embrace, made one decision above all: to hold fast to one another in a world that gave nothing freely. Through bone, through fire, through sacrifice carried in silence, they taught us that humanity is not just what survives, but what chooses to stay, to remember. The symbols are faded now, the ash long wind-scattered, but the heart of their truth burns still in how we love, how we share, how we reach toward flame when the night deepens. Let this be the close, not a farewell, but a keeping. Their fire sleeps, but their warmth remains, and in us, it will never fade. So let this light remain, quiet and enduring, as we step fully from their world into our own, forever changed by the weight of what they left behind. In every fire passed hand to hand, in every meal shared in love, in every story whispered through generations, they travel with us still. Early humans, who once knelt under a sky brittle with stars and carved meaning from hunger, have not vanished. They have become the soul of our memory. Their silence is our inheritance, and in its depth we find not fear, but reverence. Let no voice speak of them as beasts, but as the first bearers of bond, the first singers of survival's song. The fire is gone now, yes, but its light, sacred, sorrowful, and human, walks within us always. And so, beneath the vast hush of time and the settling weight of centuries, we offer this final silence not as an ending, but as a consecration. The story told here, in ash and marrow, in memory and flame, does not vanish with the closing of its final line. It deepens, it roots, it becomes part of the soil beneath our feet and the breath we seldom notice but always draw. The early humans who once huddled in flame-lit caves and made impossible choices in service of tomorrow did not perish into myth or vanish into dust. They remain, not in form, but in rhythm, pulsing through our instincts, our rituals, our reaching. Their fire, now cold in hearth but warm in soul, lights the long corridor from ancient night to modern dawn. They endured, so we could begin. And now, in this last grateful breath, we remember not what they were forced to take, but what they refused to let go. Each other. Let the light dim softly across the ages, its final gleam resting upon the faces of those who dared to carry us forward before the world had shape or certainty. Their bones have crumbled, their echoes faded, but the meaning they forged endures, not in stone tablets or written names, but in the quiet fire that still flickers within every choice to survive with kindness, every act of remembrance born from loss. The tale of early humans and their stark communion with necessity has not ended in this telling. It has only returned to where it was always meant to rest, in memory, in marrow, in the spaces between breath and belonging. And so, with reverence and without regret, we leave their world now, not untouched, but transformed, bearing the sacred warmth they kindled beneath the sky of hunger, the warmth that still lives within us, unbroken, enduring, and eternal. And now, with the fire's echo fading into stillness, and the last cave cloaked once more in its ancient dark, the story rests. It leaves behind no monument but memory, no relic but reverence. In those early humans, cold, hungry, and unyielding, we do not see strangers. We see beginnings. Not in their struggle alone, but in the way they held each other when the world gave nothing back. Their legacy is not carved in grandeur, but in the quiet blaze of endurance. Let that be what endures within us, not the image of what they consumed, but the truth of what they kept alive. A single spark in the dark, a promise without words, that no matter how deep the night, we would not face it alone. And in that warmth they remain, our first ancestors, our unseen fire, lighting the path still unfolding. So with this last hush, may they rest, not beneath judgment, but beneath the dignity of being remembered rightly. The first humans did not merely survive the Ice Age. they defined the shape of survival itself. In hunger, they chose one another. In silence, they offered meaning. And in the act of enduring, they assembled the architecture of all who followed. Their bones no longer bear the cold. Their echoes no longer speak aloud. Yet through every fire we light, every story we pass across time's vast silence, we give thanks. For they were not relics of the past, but the very first shelter humanity found in itself. The fire is out, the story complete, but its warmth, quiet, sacred, undying, walks with us still. So let the fire's last breath blend with the silence, and let the tale lie gently across the deep earth it once rose from. What began in hunger, in fear, in unknowable twilight, ends here not as tragedy, but as testament to the first flicker of connection that lit humanity's long ascent. These early humans, their lives sculpted by cold and communion, gave us no glorious ending, only the quiet miracle of a beginning we still carry within. Let their memory stretch beyond myth, beyond judgment, and rest in the marrow of who we are. For in their final acts, carved in bone, cradled in darkness, they left not horror, but hope. And in that hope, in that warmth, however faint, we remain forever bound to them. The story is ended, the fire is out, but the light endures, not behind us, but ahead, waiting to be kindled anew.